All right, YouTube, Genesis here. We're back. We're going through again the Hillary Clinton email scandal and how she got off, and we're all the way through the MENA connection, and now we're going to start talking about distribution. So we're gonna briefly touch on the distribution in the effect that this drug trade has had on the population, specifically the black population in the United States. Okay. And then we're going to go from there and start talking about the banking and how they laundered their money. And then after that, we'll talk about what to do now. But for now, today's video, or this particular video, this is what we're going to cover. We're going to cover the focus in on the distribution. And we're going to lean on a guy named Gary Webb, who is a investigative journalist. They made a movie about him. Freeway Ricky Ross and others, because he's probably only one of a bunch. We're going to focus on the war on drugs, mass incarcerations, Hillary Clinton's use of the term super predators and its relationship to the Clinton crime bill, because that's what she was pushing at that time. So we're going to look at some statistics. We've already looked at just some charts, and you'll look at this in an entirely different way once you understand how much the Clinton family had to do with the drug trade moving. Remember, Barry Seal said he was moving $100 million a month worth of cocaine into Mena, Arkansas. All right, so the question is, where to go? And then when you look at the crack cocaine epidemic in the 80s and 90s in the ghettos, you have to ask yourself another question: how'd they get it? Okay, Freeway Ricky Ross wasn't importing cocaine. He was one distribution point, or cog in the wheel, so to speak. Right. So this is what Gary Webb figured out through his sources. Freeway Ricky Ross being one of them. But let's just take a brief look here at Gary Webb and the kind of things that he talks about. And you can see that he's very much part of our diagram, as his information proved extraordinarily valuable. I think that it triggered multiple hearings, and he ended up, they say, committing suicide, although I've never seen somebody get shot in the head twice in order to commit suicide, or shoot themselves in the head twice. But yeah, that's just to give you an idea of how much information he's provided on this topic. So he does tie it back in, and I'm going to open up now. I just want to show you what he talks about. And again, there's a tremendous amount of information on this, but I want you to hear from the horse's mouth Hillary Clinton talk about when she's selling the Clinton crime bill. When she's selling it, she's going to start talking about super predators, which is a racial term. And then I'm going to open up another video and show you how she got trolled by a protester in one of those highfalutin meetings. And I just wish people understand how guilty she actually is. It's not just that she said this. She's part of the ones that orchestrated the cocaine coming in. She didn't, but she's very, very tied to it. So let's just listen first and foremost what she had to say, and we'll look at the crime rates after.
In 1994, Bill Clinton wanted to pass a crime legislation, and it was 3 strikes bill. So if you have Hillary Clinton was the first lady and aggressively lobbied for it. She gave a speech in '94 defending this piece of legislation. Now, she had many different defenses to it, and some of it were good parts of the bill, including community policing. And here in this clip, she's going to be talking about gangs, not just all kids, not just black kids. But when they talk about super predators, they almost always meant young African-American kids. And so here is Hillary Clinton talking about what should be done with them.
Not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have
Maybe you're working on flooding their neighborhoods with cocaine.
to bring them to heel.
Bring them to heel. Very rarely was the term super predator
Look at
ever
that.
used in reference to white kids.
That's when they
Perhaps
started
sometimes
bringing in opium.
reference to the Columbine kids, but almost always when talking about black kids in inner cities who
Look
are
here,
in gangs.
94, that's
So I'm
when
giving
Clinton
you the full
passed.
context. It wasn't just that she was talking about super predators, and it wasn't just regular old kids walking down the street. But was it racially used, that term? Yes, it most certainly was. It was used over and over by Republicans, adopted by the Clintons to scare everybody. Oh, watch out for the super predators. They have no conscience. They have no empathy. We got to bring them to heel. So is that quote accurate? Hell yes, it's accurate. That's why we went and got the video for you guys. So I remember when we first ran the story based on a story by Michelle Alexander, who's one of the leading African-American scholars in this country. People couldn't believe the quote. Well, here she is saying it. And if it wasn't clear enough, here it is again and again.
Not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel.
Look at that. I mean, what a devious bitch. She's pumping, trying to sell the new Clinton crime bill. Look at the ramifications of government trafficking of heroin and cocaine. So remember, 1970s, so they're bringing in the cocaine and passing all the laws at the same time. So it's, and once you understand how intimately connected the Clintons are to both sides of the equation, you as a black man or black woman in the United States, I can't understand how you could possibly vote for these people in good conscience. There's no way. You just, once you understand what they've done and how they've specifically targeted these communities with these drugs that they brought into MENA, I mean, it's insane. So that is that.
Just gangs of
Now we're going to go from there and we're going to go into Gary Webb, and he's going to tie it all out, and I'll just let the video play.
His story, the most controversial of the past year, because after investigating the origins of the crack epidemic, he claimed he found a link leading right to the CIA.
No doubt, by way of Mena, Arkansas.
Men who were working for the CIA's army were responsible for bringing all that cocaine into Los Angeles that sparked the crack epidemic.
The CIA's army, Webb says, were the Contras, the anti-communist rebels fighting the government of Nicaragua back in the 1980s. An
Oliver
army
North.
and funded by the CIA.
From profits after they were cut off by the Congress from selling cocaine.
Webb wrote that some Contra supporters smuggled cocaine to America to raise money for their cause.
The CIA has been bringing drugs into this country.
As then CIA Director John Deutsch discovered, it's an accusation that rings true for many, especially for some in the African American community. And Webb's story has taken on a life of its own.
And Gary,
On the talk show circuit and the internet, some have even gone beyond Webb's charges to accuse the CIA of conspiring to target young African Americans.
Was the CIA willing to poison our cities and crack cocaine?
On the basis of what you learned, do you believe that there was a conscious decision, a meeting where someone sat down and said, we're going to poison the youth of black America and here's how we're going to do it?
No, I don't. These guys were looking to raise money, and I don't think...
It doesn't care what he says. It's not an accident. He only knows he can only see one little tentacle, right? And so he might think it's a snake, but no, it's no doubt an octopus.
It mattered to them where they did it.
No, police state, gun laws. No. You're sorry, buddy. You got one little tentacle. You think it's a snake, it's an octopus.
They just went where they could raise the money.
Gary Webb says his stories were largely based on the testimony of a drug dealer with Contra connections who became a U.S. government witness. But 9 months after the series was published, the controversy continues. Some of the heavyweights of American journalism have examined Webb's work and found it reckless, often wrong.
Just this week, Webb was pulled off the CIA story after his
How do you know you're on the right track when people start attacking you?
own executive editor admitted the articles oversimplified the origins of the crack epidemic and left out important conflicting evidence. He also wrote, "I feel that we did not have proof that top CIA officials knew."
It's not necessarily what you think. It's a rogue element within. It's called being compartmented.
But despite the evidence to the contrary, Gary Webb insists his stories were substantially accurate. And many Americans do seem willing to believe that their own government could have been involved in drug smuggling. So was the U.S. government involved in any way? Dateline decided to take a second look.
Crack use spread like wildfire in the early 1980s. And in Los Angeles, a drug dealer known as Freeway Ricky Ross was in the middle of it. Prosecutors called Ross the Walmart of crack. He made millions in the early 80s dealing to Los Angeles street gangs. Police say
Where did he get the cocaine?
he was among the first to take expensive cocaine powder and cook it into low-cost, highly addictive crack, then distribute it through the gangs. Webb says
Keyword, distribute.
Freeway Ricky helped trigger an epidemic of human misery.
Not on accident.
It's destroyed our community. All the black men are in prison.
They're in prison. Just remember, 1994, they're passing a 3-strike law. Hillary Clinton's calling everybody super predators, and the other side of the coin is flooding the neighborhoods and distributing through crack. And this man right here, Freeway Ricky Ross, is just a low man on the totem pole, making $2-3 million a day, distributing.
Most of us.
Rick Ross is now serving a life sentence for cocaine distribution.
The women are still strung on the drugs. Kids without fathers, without mothers.
And honestly, how much responsibility do you have for that?
A lot.
How much responsibility do the Clintons have for that? And remember, they're just one tentacle in a much larger octopus.
A lot of it was my fault. I played the game.
Police in Los Angeles say he virtually cornered the crack market, thanks to a steady supply of cheap cocaine. A pipeline so good that Ross was able to introduce crack to other cities, using his gang contacts, and to make himself, he says, a very rich man.
On your best day, how much money did you see?
A couple million, 2, 3 maybe.
On a day?
On a good day.
All right, so you could probably do the math there. If they're bringing in, let's just back it out. If they're doing 100 million wholesale into Mena, Arkansas, and he's distributing 2-3 million a day on his best day, you know, somebody with a math background could figure that one out.
How many days like that were there?
A few.
Could figure that one out and deduce how many more Ricky Rosses might have been out there.
Quite a few.
Rick Ross's drug supplier did have connections to the Contras. Dateline has been able to confirm that from former Contra leader Aden Pastora. And Pastora admits he received some aid from that drug supplier. But Pastora says he was not aware of any CIA drug connection. So we asked Gary Webb, where is the evidence the CIA knew of any drug dealing?
You have to define the CIA. If you're saying that people who were working with the CIA know they were doing it, yeah.
Okay, he's talking about a rogue element within. Right, that's always how this thing is described.
Did the director of the Central Intelligence Agency know this? I don't know.
This is nonsense.
Now retired, Dewey Claridge was the CIA's man in charge of Central America in the early 80s. He insists the agency had nothing to do with any drug trafficking or with any cover-up.
Oh, don't give me the conspiracy bullshit. Come on, you're a more intelligent man than that. Come on. I mean, come on. There has never been a conspiracy in this country.
Never?
Oh, that guy's full of shit.
Gary Webb's version of events may be wrong, but in the mid-1980s, there was a high-level White House conspiracy called Iran-Contra.
Whatever you believe, Gary Webb's stories have revived interest in an issue that's been simmering since Ronald Reagan was at the White House. Were U.S. government officials aware of drug smuggling in and around the Contra movement?
Yes.
And did they simply choose to ignore it?
No. They facilitated it.
One U.S. senator says, absolutely.
There's no question in my mind there is a complicity in the flow of drugs into this country, period.
Okay, this is Senator John Kerry, who ran a committee and conveniently dropped his, investigations, some say to make a deal for the future. But this is when he was young and motivated.
Senate investigation, led by John Kerry of Massachusetts, found that individuals who provided support to the Contras were involved in drug trafficking, and that one or another agency of the U.S. government had information regarding the involvement, either while it was occurring or immediately thereafter. Incredibly, according to Senator Kerry, smugglers even used the U.S. government's own airlift operation at El Salvador's Ilopango airport to get cocaine back across the American border. This drug enforcement agent patrolled that same airport in the mid-80s.
It was just nonstop traffic coming and going, and nobody ever inspected their planes or their cargo or whatever.
Cele Castillo told Dateline he observed rampant drug smuggling at that airport.
Well, what we had was that we had Contra pilots flying out of Ilopango, smuggling drugs into the U.S., cocaine specifically.
He claims the
most likely landing at Mena, Arkansas.
Smuggling was so open it had to be condoned by the U.S. government. Castillo says planes would arrive
because it
filled
was
with supplies for the Contras, then leave carrying cocaine for America, bound for military airfields in Florida and Texas, offloaded out of sight of the law.
See that? That's what we're dealing with. And one of those locations where one of those red arrows going, Mena, Arkansas.
Then shipped to California and other points in the U.S. And there's more. Castillo says when he reported all of this to his bosses at the DEA, he was told to ignore it.
So that's how you know it's coming from on high, right? We already talked about that.
You were told point blank. Point blank, stay away from it. It's a covert operation being run by the White House.
In a letter to Dateline, the Drug Enforcement Administration said it has vigorously investigated, and no evidence has ever been found to substantiate Mr. Castillo's charges.
Right, okay. That's the DEA agent, right? That is going on record, showing his face in front of the camera and saying, look, I saw it, I reported it, they told me to stay away from it, said it was a covert operation being run by the White House. Okay, right, so you can see even from that diagram, I mean, we obviously don't have the complete picture. It's a much bigger operation. It's a much bigger operation than just Mena. Mena's just one tentacle, just like anything else, but this is huge. This is absolutely huge. Okay, they're warring against, a whole segment of the population in the United States through what we call, the Bible call pharmakia, drugs. All right, so stay with us. That's all we're going to do on distribution. Every one of these subjects, there's far more information than we're actually covering. We just want to try to get you a whole, survey picture. But we're going to come back and we're going to focus in on the laundering of the money and the banks that were used, and then we'll try to wrap this up. Okay, stay with us, guys. Thanks. The effect that this drug trade has had on the population, specifically the black population in the United States. Okay, and then we're going to go from there and start talking about the banking and how they laundered their money, and then after that we'll talk about what to do now. But for now, all right, YouTube, Genesis here, we're back. We're going through, again, the Hillary Clinton email scandal and how she got off. And we're all the way through the Mena connection. And now we're going to start talking about distribution. So we're gonna briefly touch on the distribution in the We're going to focus on the war on drugs, mass incarcerations, Hillary Clinton's use of the term super predators and its relationship to the Clinton crime bill, because that's what she was pushing at that time. So we're going to look at some statistics. We've already looked at just some charts, and you'll look at this in an entirely different today's video, or this particular video. This is what we're going to cover. We're going to cover the focus in on the distribution, and we're going to lean on a guy named Gary Webb, who is a investigative journalist. They made a movie about him. Freeway Ricky Ross and others, because he's probably only one of a bunch. Once you understand how much the Clinton family had to do with the drug trade, moving, remember Barry Seal said he was moving $100 million a month worth of cocaine into Mena, Arkansas. Right, so the question is, where to go?